there have been a lot of retrospectives, as yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War invasion. And by the way, I'm moderating a panel this week on Wednesday in partnership with the Quincy Institute. Go ahead and put this up on the screen, guys. It's called Bad News: How the Media Marched Us into War in Iraq and Beyond. Some great panelists there. Hope you all will join us. You can join in person or online, and we'll put the link in the description so you can check that out if that is interesting to you. But, there's been a lot of retrospectives, Saagar, about how, sort of the worst villains of leading us up to that war, and understandably so. But you had a great idea, which is, why don't we take a look at some of the people who were actually correct and quite courageous in their dissent? Because it's easy to forget how hard it was to be a dissenter at that point. I mean, there was, just post 9/11, if you questioned the president and the direction he was taking the country, you were considered un-American, unpatriotic. You were just absolutely smeared. The media, from liberal to conservative media, all marching effectively in lockstep with a very few exceptions. It was very difficult to be a dissenter at this time. So we wanted to take a look at a few of the people who, took brave stands in that era. Started with a couple of the politicians here, Bernie Sanders in particular, and Barbara Lee. Let's take a look at that.
The fact of the matter is that our allies now in that region, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, those countries say, don't do it. It would cause chaos in the region. The truth of the matter is, in my view, the happiest guy in the world would be Osama bin Laden if the United States waged a unilateral invasion of Iraq, because he would have more recruits for terrorism against this country that he could have used.
September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
I don't oppose war in all circumstances. And when I look out over this crowd today, I know there is no shortage of patriots or patriotism. What I do oppose is a dumb war.
Us rushing headlong into a war unilaterally was a mistake and may still be a mistake. If it has happened, then at that point what the debate's really going to be about is what's our long-term commitment there? How much is it going to cost? What does it mean for us to rebuild Iraq? How do we stabilize and make sure that this country doesn't splinter into factions between the Shias and the Kurds and the Sunnis?
And that's, of course, Barack Obama there at the end. A reminder that this war not only was a disaster, but completely reshaped politics.
That clip, that 2002 speech, which someone almost didn't record, it was a happenstance, it was on video, that won him the presidency of 2008. And look, I have quibbles with many of those people and policy and all that. That was a heroic stance to take in 2002. And unfortunately, not enough people did it. Not enough people stood up to President Bush, to the unilateral monoculture that we were living in at the time, the O'Reillys and Fox, and leading us to that war in Iraq. But it wasn't just them. MSNBC joined with them, CNN as well. The entire establishment was fully bought into this war. It became in vogue years later to turn against it. But for those who stood up at the time, they were on an island, and many of them suffered tremendous consequence. I actually remember Tucker Carlson talking about this, about how he initially was supported the war in Iraq and received a lot of pressure from the Bush White House to do so, and actually turned against it within about 6 months to a year of the war, and was frozen out completely by the Republican establishment at the time for daring to come out and speak. We shouldn't forget, it was really Donald Trump in 2016 who broke the Iraq ceiling on the debate stage when he challenged President Jeb Bush and Jeb Bush was like, my brother kept us safe. And Trump was like, no, he didn't. The Iraq war was the greatest disaster of all time.
Yeah.
And that was it. That finally made it okay for Republicans to admit it. It took what was it, 14 years
Yeah.
to get to that point?
I mean, you could make a case that not only was Barack Obama president because
Donald
of the
Trump, no
Iraq
question.
War,
I agree.
but Donald Trump as well. So the extent that this reshaped politics, I mean, cannot possibly be overstated. And to your point, Saagar, about MSNBC, which was kind of a different outlet at that point. In the early days of MSNBC, they were just trying to be like another CNN, and they hadn't landed on what would ultimately, Keith Olbermann then shows up and he's doing, Countdown, and that's tremendously popular and is liberal. And then they're sort of like, oh, this is the business model we want to lean into. This was before those days. And Phil Donahue was one of the few voices that was critical of the Iraq War. And we also have him, and he ended up losing his job for a memo was uncovered after the fact that explicitly stated that they wanted, his show was the top rated show on the network. And they fired him because they wanted to get a pro-war voice in there. They didn't want to be, seen as traitors or un-American or whatever. So he gets fired over his criticism here. And we also have Michael Moore, who gave quite a stunning Oscar acceptance speech where he's basically like played off the stage as well to give you a sense of how fraught this was at the time. Take a listen.
At that time, half the political voice in this nation was silenced, really. And I believe most people at that time opposed this war. Most people did. They thought, what are we, why, how come over there? And yet, every major metropolitan newspaper in this country supported the invasion of Iraq. Think about that for a minute. Every major metropolitan. This is what you can do with the politics of fear. The Bush took this whole nation and the whole media establishment by the ear and led it right into the sword. Amazing. In the land of free speech, free press.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
For all the talk of Hollywood being liberal and all that, at the time when it was in vogue, they were booing him while he was there on the stage. And then Phil Donahue, he literally lost his job. We were doing some reading. He was replaced by a show called literally Countdown Iraq, hosted by Lester Holt, who is now on the nightly news. Amazing that is supposedly a trusted figure. And Donahue, I mean, this was a real career blow to him at the time. There weren't no internet shows that he was able to go out and start for himself. If you were taken off of cable, you were dead for a long time. And really the vindication of their views. That's why I thought it was important to pay homage to these people. It's never popular in the moment to speak out against that. The only thing I do think he's wrong about is, unfortunately, I think the majority of people did believe in the Iraq War. You could blame the media, you could blame Bush, and ultimately Bush is the one most responsible for pushing the propaganda. But the president had an extraordinary amount of trust by the American people at that time to, quote, keep us safe. He blew it in Afghanistan, spent all of his political capital on Iraq, and it really wasn't until 2005 when the deaths started really going up amongst American soldiers and the security situation became a total disaster did the American people really turn against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was doing some reading in preparation for moderating this panel and refreshing my memory about some of the dynamics and some of the villains and all of that. And I found there was a fairness and accuracy in reporting analysis of 2 weeks of coverage in the lead up to the war. They found 222 of the 297 current and retired officials that networks overwhelmingly relied on as guests were associated with governments that were backing the war. 4 out of the 297 were critical. 4.
Wow.
So, yeah, of course the American people, all they heard were voices of, we have to do this. And they were convinced, nearly 2/3 of the public thought Saddam Hussein had played a role in the September 11th attacks. 90% believed he had WMD. So the propaganda was so thick and coming at you from effectively every single corner of the media, virtually without fail. I mean, there are like a handful of reporters who were critical and skeptical of the case that was being made by the Bush administration for war. Yeah, when you have that sort of force coming from the media at the American public, yeah, you're going to end up with a majority of people saying, oh, we have to, I guess we have to do that. Literally everyone I hear says we have to do this.
The other part, too, is part of the reason we played the lawmakers first is if anyone had the power to stop this war, it was Congress. Congress had the ability to question what was actually going on, to subpoena more. They had the ability to have the intelligence assessments, question those intelligence assessments with the CIA, with George Tenet, call them into back rooms, actually exert some pressure, deliver a real report to them as to whether they were going to vote for that authorization of military use of force against Iraq or not. They abdicated that responsibility harder, even more so, I would say, than the media. The media, they did not have access to that information. Congress actually did. They bought the Bush administration hook, line, and sinker. And look, it was a disaster. It was a disaster for all time. And, you know, thousands of American soldiers are dead. Nobody knows how many Iraqis are dead. It literally could be in the millions. Not to mention the destruction of Syria, the rise of ISIS, the fact that we took our eye off the ball. It took us 10 years and how many billions of dollars to eventually kill bin Laden, which is what we wanted to do there in the first place. And then 20 years in Afghanistan. The entire thing it's such a nightmare. I don't think I would be in politics if it wasn't for the Iraq War. You know, I probably would have fulfilled my parents' dreams and become an engineer. But I just remember I was looking at this and I was like, man, this is so wrong. And, you know, just over the years getting to know people who were maimed and killed in Iraq. And it's just, man, 20 years later, I can't even believe it.
For what? For what? Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.